Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. So glad to see some familiar names and faces. And we are so excited to be here today to give you an updated talk about the state of the Jewish vegan movement. And so without further ado, here we have Rabbi Shmuly Yanklowitz, and you have the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emma Goldblatt, for all your amazing work you do leading Shamayim. And thank you all for joining us, whether you're on the Zoom today or you're on the live stream or you're in the recording. We are happy to be discussing this with you. And we hope it will be a dialogue that you will write in the chat some of your thoughts or questions as we explore this together. Let's start with a little bit of a nigun. The teachers of the Musar movement tell us that the furthest path in the world is the path from the head to the heart. So even if people know why they should be vegan, they may not really know why they should be vegan. And they have to kind of move that from the head to the heart. And we hope that our work will continue to make that possible. So let's start with a little nigun to help us get into the space to reflect on these really deep ideas together. Hiri nai 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 nai. Hiri nai 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 nai. Hiri nai 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 nai. Nai 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 nai. Nine, 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 nine. Nine, 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 oh, nine, 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 one, nine, 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 nine. Shalom, shalom, wonderful friends. Thank you so much for being here and to explore the state of the Jewish vegan movement in 2024. And we hope to hear from you. The first thing I want to ask you that you're welcome to write in the chat is, how do you think this movement is going in America and globally? Do you have an anecdote to share of how you think Jewish veganism is going well? Do you have an anecdote to share how you think it's not going well? I want to invite anyone who has any insight or reflections on that to put that in the chat. And this is going to be a little bit of a presentation, but also a collective brainstorm together to strengthen each other in building this movement of compassion, building this movement for human health, for the environment, for animals, for peace in the world. And it's so crucial at a time like now when the urgency is through the roof. And speaking of urgency, where I want to start is with the environment. So I'm going to share some slides for a moment around some of these issues with the environment. Okay, I hope everyone can see that. Okay, can you see that? Great. All right, so we live in such a beautiful world. If you have not recently taken a hike or gone canoeing or gone running or done something to give us yira, an amazement of the world, of our trees, of our skies, of our water, it is so important that we stay connected to nature. Go for a walk in the forest. Go into our desert. I live out here in Arizona where it's a desert everywhere. Phoenix is one of those cities you're not supposed to build a city. It's not really sustainable to build a city in the desert, but the deserts are also remarkable places, whether you're in the Negev or you're in the Valley of the Sun. And it's actually become one of my favorite things, whether it's sitting by the ocean or it's going on a hike or skiing, just being outside. It's so healing for us to sit by the water, to get fresh air. And here's a midrash we're probably familiar with, but it's worth reminding ourselves, from Kohelet Rabbah. When God created Adam, God took Adam and led him around all the trees of the garden. And God said to Adam, "Look at my creations, how beautiful and amazing they are. And everything I made, I created for you. Be careful that you don't spoil or destroy my world, because if you do, there is nobody after you to fix it. This is a real charge for us to be guardians, to shift from a very anthropocentric worldview that everything is here for me. However I want to drive, however I want to fly, however I want to consume is up to me, because that's maybe how we were raised, to think that things are just here for us. But the fact is, when we talk about the messianic dream of the lion lying down with the lamb, we are the lion, right? We are the ones that the world is waiting for to lay down. We are the only species, only of all the countless species in the world, we are the only one destroying this place. We are the only one that is wiping out species, warming our planet, and causing irreparable harm. It says in Avot de Rabbi Natan, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he's the famous one who says, "Give me Yavne," when Rome is destroying Jerusalem. He used to say, if you have a sapling, you have a tree you're going to plant in your hand, and someone says, "Hey, Mashiach is here," stay and complete your planting. Then go greet the Messiah. That is to say that if we were to stop planting, if we were to stop caring for the earth, the redemption itself would go away. We'd lose it. Mashiach would leave, right? We have to constantly be in a state of tending to the earth. This is not just some hippy-dippy, tree-hugging, plant-kissing kind of idea. This is about us. It's about our children. It's about our grandchildren. It is about survival, the whole world, right? And it's just astounding to me how large the population of the world is that is simply not interested in the idea. It's been labeled some fringe far left movement. Makes no sense. How could it be partisan that we protect the earth? Partisan that we protect our water and our air? Like, what in the world? This is about humanity, that we politicize such issues like this. The impact. The consequences of climate change. We're having water shortages and wildfires. This is caused by disappearing glaciers, early snowmelt, and severe droughts. We have coastal flooding on eastern seaboard, especially in Florida and the Gulf of Mexico. This is caused by rising sea levels. We have destruction of agriculture and fisheries. This is caused by heat waves, extreme precipitation, and new pests in forests, farms, and cities. We're talking about extinction of plant and animal species rapidly, caused by disruption of habitats, such as coral reefs and alpine meadows. We're talking about increased allergies caused by increased growth pollen-producing ragweed. We're talking about increased asthma caused by higher levels of air pollution. We're talking about increased infectious disease outbreaks. We thought COVID was bad with that pandemic, caused by cruelty to animals in an open live animal market. We should expect many more pandemics if we allow this kind of factory farming and cruelty to animals to continue. Increased infectious disease outbreaks caused by increase in conditions favorable to pathogens and mosquitoes. Also, we should remember that this is an issue of poverty. This is an issue of racial injustice. Indigenous peoples, people of color, and the economically marginalized are more vulnerable to the worst impacts of climate change. It makes sense why rich people would simply not care. They would change nothing in their lives if they care about the environment, because they know they can protect themselves for a certain amount of time, right? And protect their kids. They can move wherever they have to move. They can get whatever equipment they need, but some people can't do that. When I lived in LA, I met teenagers who lived 5 or 6 miles from the Pacific Ocean, who had never been to the beach as teenagers because they could not get a bus ticket to the beach. I mean, it's astounding for people who just fly around the world and take cars wherever. The thought that there's people who they can't even travel to the beach for the first 15 years of their lives. How are people going to move their houses because of climate change? And the inequities in housing, healthcare, and the workforce make already marginalized communities particularly vulnerable to the worst effects of climate change. Climate change increases the frequency and intensity of natural disasters. The resources our societies have to respond to and recover from natural disasters are spread thin, and communities are increasingly struggling to recover from the financial devastation of extreme weather events. Okay, maybe last slide for today. So According to research from Project Drawdown, the most efficient and effective way to decrease global greenhouse gas emissions is to waste less food and to convert to plant-rich diets, right? Huge amounts of food waste. We all do it, except my dear friend Isaac. All of us do it. Um, and the plant-based diet is just crucial to decreasing global greenhouse gas emissions. The number is higher than what I have here, but I always like to understate rather than overstate. Currently, 70 billion land animals are consumed annually by a human population of 7.9 billion. That's an astounding number. I actually, and that excludes fish, of course. But the number I most recently saw was over 90 billion. I want to give the 70 billion just so that I don't overstate, because it's important to always be accurate. So I don't understate it, but it's an astounding number. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my slides there. But I wanted to open up there because we all know, if we're here on the live stream or in the recording or here in the Zoom, that this is painful to animals, traumatic, and the worst suffering possible in factory farms. We know about cardiac disease and how it's the #1 killer in America, and how linked that is to animal products. You're not just meat, but dairy and eggs and the like, things that are just really really destroying us. And but we have to remember that a lot of environmentalists have not made these changes. It's one of the great hypocrisies. What's the film? What's the documentary that exposes that? Cowspiracy, is that the one? Maybe it's Cowspiracy. I forgot which one of those spiracy movies is the one that exposes the environmental movement because of big ag money. But there are even environmental groups that I'm a part of and connected to, where it's just considered normal still to not be vegan. Like, you should make every possible change environmentally, but so something is going wrong there. So in the state of the Jewish vegan movement, I'm a part of many social justice coalitions where everything is discussed but animals. You talk about race, you talk about gender, you talk about sexual orientation, you talk about not buying plastic, you talk about war, and so on and so forth, immigration, refugees, but you don't talk about food. You don't talk about food justice. You don't talk about animals. Off the table, literally off the table. So starting with Israel, it's reading a quote here. Statistically, veganism has seen substantial growth in Israel, which is often highlighted as one of the most vegan-friendly countries in the world. By 2016, so about 8 years ago, approximately 5% of the Israeli population identified as vegan, which is more than double from 2.6% in 2010. You get that? From 2010 to 2016. Astounding. This trend is particularly strong in Tel Aviv, which has been dubbed the vegan capital of the world. Unfortunately, it's less common in traditional circles. In more progressive secular circles in Israel, such as Tel Aviv, it's become much more common. My colleague Omri Paz from Vegan Friendly shared that today, based on their research, there are 500,000 vegans in Israel. Almost all of them are Jewish. And that's of about 7 million Jews in Israel. And so if about 500,000 of 7 million, that's about 7%. It's astounding. So about 7% of Israeli Jews are vegan. He says 12 years ago, it was more like 100,000 as opposed to 500,000. We're talking rapid growth. This is not only because of education and awareness, it's also because how much easier it is. It's funny we say 12 years ago. My wife and I went vegan on our wedding day, which was in May of 2011. That was 13 years ago. And we were terrified because the cheese was gross. The egg alternatives weren't good. The meat options, I mean, all the things we have today, there was nothing like that. It was like tofu. You just got tofu. I mean, I'm a fan of tofu, but that was like it. And the yogurts weren't good options. All these things. And we were like, look, we're gonna have a sad life, but better to have a sad moral life than a happy, what did Plato say? Better to be a sad philosopher than a pig, thrilled about the poop they're rolling in or whatever it was. But however, Plato said it more poetically than that. But yeah, we're just going to be sad, but like we can't in good conscience live like this. And so, but we had no idea what was to come. And we're only getting started with these options of what it looks like to eat amazing food. And some people are going to get there because they have a heart attack and their doctor's going to tell them they got to do it. Actually, most doctors won't tell them because the doctor has no idea. They have one nutrition class at most in medical school. And and people go to their doctor and talk nutrition. The doctor knows nothing about it. Doctors are experts in their field, but not nutrition. And that's an astounding thing. And a lot of doctors who are now plant-based advocates are exposing that, how the medical school curriculum is funded by Big Ag also in order to avoid these conversations. So some people are going to go vegan because they have a heart attack. Some people are going to eventually do it because they're environmentalists. Some people are going to do it because they've seen an animal get slaughtered or they've been to a factory farm, which is rare because you can't get in there. But they have exposure now. They've seen some footage that shows just how atrocious this is. That this is going to be the greatest stain on humanity. That our children and grandchildren are going to say, "You ate what? You did what? You were a part of this system that did this." It's like lahavdil, like separating by various degrees. It'd be like having a parent who was like a slave owner, and now you're a part of liberation, like in a very different sense. It's like, you did what? Like, it's hard for the next generation to understand why somebody would be a part of such an atrocious system. And there's many other things like that today that, to be ashamed of, that we're complicit in. Actually, just one more thing on that. So I share the positive side there. On the negative side of what he says, so good, number of vegans in Israel increasing. But what about the non-vegans? What's going on with them? In the last 10 years, up to the last 2 years, the animal product consumption rate grew at the same rate of the population growth, which is 1% to 2% a year. But in the last 2 years, it's actually a little higher. Besides dairy, which is still stagnating. So that's the say, friends, that yes, in Israel, something really great is happening. The number of vegans is rapidly growing. But among the non-vegans, we're seeing very little reduction. And yes, we want to see a vegan world, but for all the people who are not going vegan tomorrow, we just want to see mass reduction. If people can go to meatless Mondays, if people can eat eggs once a week rather than every day, if people can have 90% be oat milk and almond milk and soy milk and hemp milk and rice milk rather than dairy milk. If people can just make those reductions, that would be a great thing. In 2015, meaning 9 years ago, Beit Hillel in Israel, a consortium of 120 Orthodox rabbis, scholars, and community leaders in Jerusalem, issued a paper calling on Jews to reduce their meat consumption in order to alleviate animal suffering. That's very interesting that an Orthodox group in Israel was calling for that, even though they're on the more liberal end of Orthodoxy over there. Horat Chaim, a group that I'm involved with, of about 400 rabbis in Europe, Israel, and America, also put out a major statement signed by many rabbis around the world calling for reduction. And Jewish Veg also put out a list a number of years ago around this. There was a vegan Orthodox activist named Asa Kaiser in Israel who's giving talks that often go viral. And in the US, let's talk about the US now and various denominations here and some trends. A Pew Research study recently showed that fewer than 1 in 5 US Jews, that's 17%, say they keep kosher in their home, including 14% who say they separate meat and dairy, and 3% who say they are vegetarian or vegan. Jews are also less likely to observe religious dietary restrictions, the survey found. Only 40% of Jews abstain from eating pork, while 57% affirm they still eat pork. These are just general food trends I'm sharing now. As of 2022, 5 to 8% of the US population identified as vegetarian. That's not Jews, that's US population. 5 to 8% vegetarian, which is about 9.7 million people. This is similar to the percentage of vegetarians in other Western countries, like Germany. However, the number of vegans in the US is much smaller, at around 4%, which is still very high in my view. 4%? If that's accurate, these are hard things to get perfect data on. but that is a very positive trend. Um, and that's not, again, that's not just Jewish. This is American society. Now, it's true that Jews tend to be at the forefront of movements. If you go to animal rights conferences or animal welfare conferences or the like, Jews have always been disproportionately in attendance there. Wearing my kippah at those kind of spaces, all kinds of people come up to me. Jiffa has been involved with engaging the conservative movement, more deeply in thinking about sustainable dining in their program. But interesting enough, the reform movement in many ways is the weakest of the three big movements. Orthodoxy is having big conversations. Conservative movement is. The reform movement, of course, there's many reform Jews who are vegans or vegetarians, but the movement itself is very close to engaging, it seems. I recently reached out to a few hundred reform rabbis and leaders to ask what's going on. Are there any statements? Are there any, movements or initiatives? And they couldn't point to anything. The only thing they could point to was a book published by CCAR Press, which is the Reform Publishing Company, The Sacred Table, Creating a Jewish Food Ethic, which came out a number of years ago, edited by Rabbi Mary Zamor, written or edited, I forget. But that is considered kind of the best statement of food ethics by the Reform movement. And it's not a Let's Go Vegan book, but it's raising just concerns within food ethics. So the folks who are present here who consider themselves Reform have a unique opportunity to engage their communities. Certainly the ultra-Orthodox community also is very unengaged in this, with some exceptions. But if you just went to you went to Yeshiva University, or you went to, Englewood, New Jersey, and you went to a Kiddush and saw the food they were serving, or you went to Satmar Hasidim, in Brooklyn, or the like, it'd almost be crazy. It's actually funny. I was recently at a conference, and one guy, he started cracking up when I said I was vegan. Like, he was like, he'd never met he thought it was hilarious. He's like, vegans are people with tattoos and 10 nose piercings or something. Like this, weird person that they've heard about. Like, there's no Jewish religious, Jew who's going to be that. And he literally couldn't stop laughing. It was like the most hilarious thing to him. So we've got our work ahead of us. But it's not only qualitative that we should be reflecting on, but also quantitative. What is it that we're hearing and seeing in our communities? I want to hear your questions and your thoughts. I feel, in general, aside from that story I just shared, that it's becoming less weird, less marginal. There's more respect. There's more options. There's more people considering vegan options for many reasons. And I also feel that Jewish vegans are always a little bit lonely and alienated, but a little less so, with more options and more community as that continues to grow. At Shamayim, we're really excited about a bunch of things we're doing, such as our Synagogue Vegan Challenge, where we're giving grants to synagogues around the country and around the world, for supporting synagogues that want to introduce vegan options and food justice topics to their communities. We're also leading our campus fellowship, where we are engaging college students and their peers in thinking about and growing in their leadership. We have a debates program, and I hope you'll introduce this to your community, because essentially we are offering $5,000 prize to a synagogue's food budget if they will debate me in front of at least 50 of their synagogue members, in person or on Zoom. Debate me as to, I will argue that veganism is the most authentic Jewish approach, and they can argue that it's not, or that meat eating is the most authentic Jewish approach. And given that their synagogue members are the ones voting, they are likely to win. We have given, of the 3 debates we've done so far, we've given 2 of the 3 synagogues $5,000 prizes for winning the debate, where their congregants voted for their rabbi over me, and that it was for making more compelling arguments. And given that most people who show up will be far from vegan, it makes sense why they would win. But we hope you'll encourage your community to do that, whether they do it for the funding or because they want an interesting educational program. On the negative side, we seem to be a bit stuck and a bit slow on the clean meat movement. The the pro meat community has tried to mislabel it as lab meat. By calling it lab meat, they're trying to say, ugh, this is like something made in a lab, right? But clean meat or real meat or ethical meat, we might call it. This is unfortunately being received with growing skepticism. People kind of naively thought it was going to just rocket launch instantly, but there's a lot of a learning curve to get it right and to get the costs down and to develop the technology. It takes time, and we don't want to we don't want to see this as false prophets who we're over promising on that. That's only one piece of the solution. We need the ethical meat, the clean meat. We need better food alternatives aside from that, where more people can access this stuff. We need non-vegan places to offer more vegan options. We need the education on climate and on human health and on animal suffering. We need all that. The other negative trend that's happening is a growing distrust of medical authorities, and a growing distrust of climate science. Bill Gates, in a closing blog post just a few years ago, it said that the greatest crisis in America was the breakdown of trust in society. That essentially people trust media less, they trust government less, they trust medical authorities and scientists less, they trust religious authorities less. And Bill Gates said the breakdown of trust in our infrastructure is a sign of a downfall of a society. Like, we need to rebuild trust. And so too, this growing distrust of medical authorities and climate science is going to hurt this movement as well. So friends, I've talked for about a half hour now, and I want to pause because I've said a lot. I've shared some challenging trends. I've shared many positive stats and trends in various movements and in Israel and in the Reformed, Conservative, and Orthodox communities. I've shared some of the programs that are happening and going well, and there's so much more to discuss. So feel free to put question or thought in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself as well. I'm just going to take a moment to read what's on the side here. Yes. Yes, good. I appreciate that comment. Yes, the comment was, if you didn't read it, that it's very easy to fight the man. It's very easy to be like, government is evil, corporations are evil, I hate capitalism, right? And to have some abstract boogeyman out in the world that we want to critique, not make any personal changes ourselves. And I think, the Torah says, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. And why does it say justice twice is the famous question. Twice, because the first time it says justice is justice as an ends. The second time it says justice is justice as the means. We should fight for justice justly. We should be compassionate to people we work with and build just movements. But also, if we want the world to go vegan, for the climate, for human health, for animals, for all sustainability, then we can't just point fingers at big oil, right? We have to change ourselves and change our families and change our communities and allow them to become examples. I don't want to be naive. We do need systemic change through policy. We have to advocate for policy changes, right? But that can never be divorced from personal transformation and from how our communities operate. So I see, I don't know if some folks just joined late or they didn't get the memo that we were starting half hour ago. In any case, if you missed the first half hour presentation, you can get the recording, which we'll have up in a few days. And if you were here, that's wonderful. And now Emma's going to start with our first few questions, and then we're going to open up the conversation for other folks who have thoughts or questions to share.
Yes, thank you all for coming. So the first question I have is actually from Richard Schwartz, who just joined us. The question is, how can we get rabbis to recognize that animal-based diets violate basic Jewish teachings on preserving our health, treating animals with compassion, protecting the environment, conserving natural resources, and reducing hunger?
Great. I love that. Thank you, Dr. Schwartz, for being um, father or grandfather of our Jewish vegan movement. Over there from Israel, still fighting the good fight every day. We appreciate you. And first, I guess I should share a joke as it comes to rabbis. How many? So you ask, how can we get rabbis to change? How many rabbis does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer, change. Change the light bulb. So it's hard for rabbis to change. Um, some of the rabbis simply don't have the education. It never came up in their rabbinic studies or in their liberal education to really understand these issues. And but some do get it, and some do care, and they need our support. How do they get our support? They get our support by our grants to their synagogues that makes it possible for them to offer food. If they just stand up from the pulpit and we're like, I'm taking away your pastrami, and I'm taking away your corned beef and your chicken matzo ball soup, they're going to lose their job, right? But if they say, oh, Shamayim's offering us a grant and our synagogue needs the funding, and so we're going to introduce more vegan options, and then subtly offer some education around what it's like to be an animal in a crate, stripped from their mother without sunlight, what it's like to go through shechita, go through slaughter, what it's like to live in 2050 when it's hard to breathe, right? And increasing climate issues, what it's like to have a quadruple bypass surgery or have a heart attack, right? Because you never knew anything about this, right? They can start to introduce these issues as they have this support. So yes, rabbis need to come along. And I appreciate Dr. Schwartz's great question on how we can engage them. Emma, back to you.
Yes, so we also got several questions about kind of with the same theme. So I kind of just gonna use one to say them all. How can we use the fact that, like you mentioned earlier, the livestock factory farming is the main cause of climate change as a way to promote veganism and make people make a change?
Great, great. Yes, exactly. That if we can just get people to admit that factory farming is one of the greatest evils of our time, then we've won. Why? Because once you realize that the system is cannot be separate from that, right? That the system is 99.9% emerging from that, and that you basically don't have sustainable options because in our capitalistic economy they can't compete. Maybe there's some rich folks who can buy some more humane stuff, or something like that, some cage free or this, this or that. But essentially, most people don't have access to that, and that doesn't solve all the problems, anyways, of course. And once they admit the factory farming is evil, then they admit that the entire eating of animal products is itself an evil. And but we say in psychotherapy that you can't strip somebody's foundation until you've given them another one. It's kind of violent to do that. They need somewhere to stand. So as we're stripping away this illusion that people were raised with, oh, that you need milk for your bones and you need meat for your child to grow strong, have enough protein, all these silly things, that we need to equip them with how to cook. And that's why also at Shamayim, we're doing cooking demos and helping people figure out how to eat and eat really well so that they realize that it's not going to be hard. It's going to be joyful to be a part of this liberation movement.
Thank you. Another question from David. He says, so many Jews link their sense of being Jewish to their animal-based food, that moving to plant-based food seems like rejecting their Jewish identity. How do we replace animal-based Jewish foods with plant-based foods?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, David. Yeah, it's a serious thing. Food is very complicated. Let me remind us that in the Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, that they eat from Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. and in their first act of eating gives birth to moral consciousness. They were not moral agents as human beings until they ate from this. That our sense of ethics, our sense of identity are so connected to our eating. This is very deep and very real. And for some people, there are comfort foods, right? And there are foods which feel so deeply Jewish because my bubby ate them or my mother served them to me. And I people who going to a Jewish deli, right, feels like their synagogue. Right. I just the smell, the feel of sitting in the booth in a New York deli, even though this is kind of a dying institution, it is so comforting to them. And I get that. And I want to be gentle and sympathetic to such folks because I get why that is. I myself, feel my identity and my psyche are connected to food in so many ways. Like I struggle as a sometimes a candy eater, even if it's vegan candy, and I realize that sometimes those things I'm eating are because of some of these early childhood experiences I had, that I was alone, I was scared, I was anxious, and nobody was there for me at the moment, and so I would eat candy. And it's like really hard to correct things like that in our lives. And so, but I think thankfully that the vegan food industry is developing things that taste like that and can bring that same comfort. And I hope that Judaism is less nostalgic and more values driven. If Judaism is just nostalgic, we should close up shop. All we want is a melody that sounds like the melody when I was a kid and the taste that tastes like what I had when I was a kid. Well, what is that worth? Like nostalgia is meaningful, but that's not a religion. That's not a culture. That's not a people, right? What we want is a values driven people more than a nostalgic one. When we eat, it doesn't just remind me of what it's like to be seven. When I eat, I feel like I'm living the highest values of our tradition.
Thank you. We have a question from Ben. I'm having a little bit trouble understanding, but maybe you can parse this out.
Right.
He
Me
states that
to but yeah, go ahead, Emma. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm finding that there's a faulty association between veganism and new postmodern social justice, saying that
Mostly the ideology, like the social justice theory ideology. Emma, can I read it?
Okay, Ben, can you say more of what
Yeah,
you're
I'll
thinking?
read it. Basically, I wrote, it's kind of strange. And thank you so much for leading this, Rabbi. It's a pleasure to finally meet you virtually. But I've been following you for a while over on the social medias, and I really appreciate what you do, and I really very appreciative of this program. But basically, my question was, I'm finding that there's a faulty association between veganism and the new postmodern social justice theory ideology that is becoming more prevalent on college campuses and in other far left circles. I've been discouraged by this. It's because I'm very pro-Israel and I'm very pro-American values. And yet I've been getting told, especially since October 7th, that my veganism can't really align with modern pro-Western values. So I know on the surface that seems pretty absurd, but the fact that it's coming up is very discouraging and, to be quite honest, confusing. And I just wanted to know how you would respond to something like that, if this even makes any sense. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So Ben, just to press a little further so I can understand your thinking, and I very much understand what you're saying. And I think this is very relevant at this moment to the state of the Jewish vegan movement, of how we're making sense of these new political and social trends. So thank you for bringing this up. When you share a little bit, to take that kind of, let's just kind of label it, labels are sometimes absurd, but let's just call it a type of far left social justice ideology that we see today. How would you position the vegan ideology within the thinking of that camp?
Yeah, I don't really, that's kind of what my question is. I don't see it related. I don't think that you need to be ideologically, embedded anywhere to, not want to eat animals and to think that that it's, not ethical to kill animals for food if it's unnecessary to do so. So it's hard. I mean, it's a very good question, and I probably have to think about that. But to me, I don't understand why there has to be an association there. But there's like, people are like, oh, well, you want to be hardcore Western, like the true American eats, burgers and dogs on the grill and all that stuff. And, I mean, you're quoting excellent stats about the veganism rising in Israel. I mean, and of course it's absurd. Like people will say, Israel, is doing everything, all the Israel haters will criticize it for one thing or the other. But I mean, the fact of the matter is Israel is really strong liberal values. They're very, not only pro vegan, but pro, gay rights and, all sorts of stuff too. Like it's a liberal democracy with 20% Arab people and with full rights. So just the fact that, there's this association that, it's the guys, camping out and shouting, supporting Hamas are the vegans, and yet the pro-Israel side are the ones who aren't, has been difficult for me to reckon with.
Yeah, Ben, thank you for sharing that. I'm also I think all Jews are struggling post October 7th, and in many different ways and in many similar ways. And I want to honor in this pluralistic space the diversity of our movement, and very much appreciate what you're raising, because I think we will do a disservice to the vegan movement if it's viewed as simply a left-wing movement and all of its intersectionalities. While it is important to embrace those, I think if this is simply about identity rather than changing the world, and people just want vegan friends and community as social and a social kind of political infrastructure, I think that we're not going to see the type of movement we want to see. And to your point around kind of American society and, the grilling culture and the like, I used to think this was a toxic masculine culture, but it's really beyond that. It's a part of American women culture as well. It's not as gendered as I used to think. This notion, I used to think that American grilling culture, steak culture and burger culture was just like a problem with masculinity. And that we need to rethink toxic masculinity, which we do, of course. But it's far beyond that in terms of American society and the anthropocentric worldview and the sense of being elitist and access to whatever we want. But anyways, I think part of the problem in those deeply problematic anti-Israel circles is a belief that the powerful are evil. That essentially, we always side with the weak, and whoever is powerful is corrupt. And that's going to mean that men are fundamentally corrupt. White people are fundamentally corrupt. Israel, who's more powerful than Hamas, is fundamentally corrupt. Now, there is some truth there to think about power dynamics and who has power and who doesn't, and around race and around gender and around other socioeconomic factors. When we have a very myopic viewpoint of how justice works in the world, and simply the more powerful one is the one who's morally wrong, I think we've done something wrong. And if the only reason we stand up for animals is because they're weak, then I don't think that's going to be persuasive enough. That we simply, now, to be sure, Jewish ethics, I think, take an approach of you stand up for the weak. There's nothing wrong with that ethic of standing up for the weak. The problem is when it gets extended to that the more power you have, the more corrupt you are. Foucault, a French postmodern thinker of the 20th century, challenged the whole binary nature of power itself, and said power is multi-directional. There's dozens of types of power. There's not just this person on top and then this person on bottom and nobody in between, right? Essentially, there's all types of power we all have. And one is lying if they pretend to be powerless. I mean, there are people who, from a political perspective, are relatively powerless. Like, I work with them every day, right? But it's also used deceptively at times to build one's own movement, to claim a lack of access to power. So this is complicated stuff we're talking about here, but I really hope that that Jews who identify deeply with Israel, however they identify with Israel, are not pushed away because of these movements. And I also hope that Americans are not pushed away, because it is still, by and large, by centrists and by conservatives, viewed as a progressive thing to do. And that's a mistake of how progressives have articulated this. This ought to be a human thing to do. to
Right,
care
that's what
about how animals are treated, to care about our health.
It shouldn't be progressive or conservative. It should be, it's like the human thing. I appreciate that. And
Yeah.
I think that's the crux. You hit the crux of my issue, was talking about power dynamics. Like, those in power are not vegan. We live in a non-vegan world, and I just get the sense that they're looking down on vegans as, you're just like the progressive fringe, when I don't see myself that way. I see myself, I don't think my politics has anything to do with, why I choose not to eat animals or their products.
Thank you. Thank you. So just before I open it up to others, just one last thought on that, which is that, I mean, I do hope that progressives have their own way to package this within their progressive worldview and feel proud of that intersectional approach. And I do hope that they'll be strategic enough that when they talk beyond their own circles, they talk about it in more nuanced and inclusive ways, so that it's not just virtue signaling and pride of identity, but one that actually is persuasive for other people as well. So thank you, Ben. I'd love to hear from someone else who'd like to unmute themselves with a question or a comment. I know we've covered a lot of ground. We only have 10 minutes left.
Okay, Carl Cabal, for wonderful work you're doing. Couple of questions. One, it's so much in the news now. Tremendous heat wave is over most of the U.S. The last 12 months, each one has broken a temperature record. Every day in the news, tremendous things about severe climate events. How do we get people to recognize that, and that there's no way we're going to avert a climate catastrophe without a major shift to vegan diets? And the second question, recognizing that, as I asked before and responded, that animal-based diets violate so many basic Jewish teachings, is it in a way sort of a rabbinic malpractice for rabbis not to be advocating veganism?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Schwartz. Great to hear from you and see you. Great to hear from you and see you. And I think this is really important that some of us really get this point, and the number of things one has to know to get to that point. If you're only watching a certain type of news network that would never talk about climate science, that would never connect extreme heat to a systemic problem, and then would never, even if they did that, connect that to factory farming. And even if they did that, connect that to a vegan diet. And even if they did that, give the tools and handholding for how one can make behavioral change in their life. The number of things that have to happen. And so I think that we need a lot of hand-holding with people to get them to a point where they can really internalize this and make these kinds of changes. I know people who get it who can't even change. They're just like, I totally get it. I just can't do it. And now, to your point of rabbis and rabbinic malpractice, yeah, I think that rabbis are supposed to be generalists. They're supposed to know a little bit about everything. And sometimes dangerously so, not too much about any one thing, and not to push one thing. I do know rabbis who have their pet cause, like they're all about feminism, or they're all about gun violence, or they're all about Israel. And there are those who are one-issue people, but most of them are kind of just giving a new sermon each week and writing a new article each week, and it's a new topic, so they stay interesting. They're just trying to survive. And but I do think that that a rabbi in this day and age should not simply be a ritual leader and a holder of spaces for life cycles and a person who gives classes. I mean, those are important roles, but should be at the forefront as a moral leader, if they have the privilege and access to that type of information and leadership role. And there are crucial issues of our day that they need to be guides on. They can't say, oh, the Israel-Gaza war, really complicated. They need to guide people through thinking about those moral issues. They can't say food justice. Oh, it's very sensitive. People have their own views. They need to guide people to growing in understanding and in changing. So I really appreciate that. And we do see a lot of our work here at Shamayim as geared towards that. And I see my colleague, Rabbi Jonathan Bernhardt here, their work at JIFA also to engaging the conservative movement now, as I shared earlier in the session. through sustainable dining and reform communities and the like. And all of us needing to also put some pressure on gently with our communal leaders. So thank you so much, Dr. Schwartz. Yes, is there another person or two who wants to hop in before we wrap up here?
Okay. Well, if nobody is getting in, what do you think?
Okay, Emma, do we have somebody?
Sorry, yeah, I see a comment that says, how can we make a meaningful health argument in the Jewish community like this to promote healthy old age? You can see in the chat what he's quoting. In the book, The Blue Zones, a Seventh-day Adventist community in Southern California is highlighted for having a plant-based diet, and how many members of the community reach this are 100 in good health.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think that we always need some humility in talking about this stuff, because you know, I'm not a medical expert. And so although I've read this stuff, and my wife reads all these plant-based medical books, you know, it is very complicated and there's always competing studies. I think what we should do is give more platforms to those medical experts who really get this, and amplify their voices more and more, to build up that credibility of these types of studies, which are just remarkable. And in particular, starting kids when they're young to think about this stuff. As you know, one of our Shamayim campaigns is to get schools, you know, to go dairy-free and offer milk alternatives and the like, and to start kids early on the right path of thinking about this stuff, and having those medical experts guide that. And Emma continues to interview folks like this in our podcast. And this is a really crucial thing, that for some people, that they simply can't feel compassion for an animal in this regard. They just, in a way that I can't relate to, but I mean, I guess there's people in the world I don't feel enough compassion for as well. So it's part of the human problem. We can only have so much empathy. So, but they just can't, like, the idea of a slaughterhouse just doesn't faze them. And the idea of climate change just feels so distant or so abstract. But the issue of their own health, like, they really care about that. And they'd like to live till, 95 rather than 65. And so I think this is a really important part of what we need to introduce. Okay, Emma, let's take just one more question from someone who hasn't spoken yet, if possible.
Does anyone else have a question? Either unmute or really quickly write in the chat. Not sure. For the people who
So
can't. Oh yeah.
let me move to some just closing remarks then. I hope we can do this kind of brainstorm more often, because I think it's really good for us to share anecdotes of what we're hearing, process some of this data together, brainstorm on how to grow the movement, all the various, organizations and groups involved, and for us to get a sense of trends and inspire each other around what we can do, and take new creative approaches to do this, because this is not going to be one group who's going to save the world. We're going to need thousands of groups involved, thousands. This is not going to be one message that's going to work for everyone. We just came out of Shavuot. Now everybody heard the words of Sinai differently. We learned from the Midrash that nobody heard the voice of God in the same way. Everybody heard something different at Har Sinai. So too, like, people are really complicated. We have different genes, we have different early childhood experiences, different values, different identities, different genders and races and the like. We all need to hear this stuff differently, and we need to hold hands with people, in this journey that they can make. I want to see the Jewish community on the forefront of this, this movement for compassion, and I want to see Trump supporters doing it. I want to see Biden supporters doing it. I want to see, RFK supporters doing it. I want to do people who aren't going to vote at all because they hate politics doing it. I want to see Buddhists and Muslims and Jews doing it, right? Like, this is for all of us. And yet our part is the Jews. How can we get the Jewish community moving forward institutionally with institutional policies? How can we see that happening personally? How can we see that happening nationally in Israel? By the way, one more thought about Israel. Zionists should care the most about environmentalism. Why? Israel is heating at a pace double than other countries. An environmental leader just shared this stat with me. That everyone thinks, oh, heating happens the same everywhere. It's not. In different regions, heating happens more rapidly. Israel is heating at a pace double the average. That's to say, if you care about the future of Israel and Jews in Israel, you should care all the more so about environmentalism and about the concern for the future of that movement. So friends, thank you for joining, and please stay in touch as we can learn together. If you found this interesting or of value, please let Emma know or send us a note so we can hold conversations like this, panel discussions more, or the like. Amy, good to see you. Thank you all so much for being here. Have a great day.